What would you do if the most dangerous man in the entire city had nowhere to go, and the only person willing to open their door was the woman who scrubbed his floors? Sophia had cleaned his tower for 2 full years. She knew his habits, his silence, his completely untouchable aura. Tonight, she found him sitting in the snow, stripped of everything, and she did the one thing that would shatter the quiet life she had spent years protecting. She invited him in. That single decision, born from the bone-deep compassion that only the truly humble carry, would drag her into a world of blood, betrayal, and power she was never supposed to touch. Stay with me, because this story will remind you that the most dangerous thing in any room is not always the man with the gun. Sometimes it is the woman who stays when every sensible voice is screaming at her to run. Before we go further, if you're new here, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications. The stories we tell on this channel go places most people are afraid to look. Like this video if a woman who refuses to abandon her humanity is your kind of protagonist. Because Sophia is about to show you exactly what that looks like.
Now,
let us begin. The snow that night was not the soft romantic kind. It came down sharp and mean, finding every thin seam in Sophia's old wool coat like it had a personal grudge. She had walked this path from the bus stop 1,000 times, but tonight the cold felt heavier, as though the city itself had grown tired of pretending to be kind. Her work uniform lay beneath the coat, a dark navy dress and white apron, stiff with starch. 10 hours of scrubbing marble and polishing chrome had left her aching in places she had learned not to mention. The glass tower she cleaned was the kind of place where the air itself seemed to cost money. She was part of its machinery, invisible, necessary, unnamed. She knew the residents by their patterns. The woman on the 34th floor who drank only imported sparkling water. The man 2 floors below who cycled through visitors with mechanical regularity. And then there was the one at the very top.
June.
His full name was Kwame June, and in the city's most dangerous circles the name alone ended arguments. He led the most powerful syndicate the city had ever quietly tolerated. When he moved through the lobby, men adjusted their posture without knowing why. He never raised his voice. His silence was louder than most men's threats. She had once seen him dismiss a rival with a single unhurried look and watch the other man physically step backward. She had made herself a rule. Never let him see her notice him. Tonight, that rule meant nothing. He was sitting on the lowest marble step, shoulders dusted white, looking like a man who had forgotten what power felt like. His charcoal suit was wrinkled. His hair had come undone. But it was his posture that stopped her. Folded inward, elbows on knees, head bowed. The authority that usually radiated from him like heat had gone completely cold. A black car slid to the curb. A man she recognized as one of June's senior lieutenants, hard-faced, named Beck, climbed out. He did not approach his boss. He walked to the trunk, removed 2 plain cardboard boxes, and set them on the wet pavement with a contempt that told Sophia everything about what had already happened. "That is everything they permitted," Beck said, his voice stripped of all deference. "The accounts are frozen. The penthouse is sealed. The council has made its decision." June did not move, did not look up. Beck let a thin smile cross his face. "Your brother was always the smarter one. You should have seen it coming." He got back in the car, and it disappeared into the white dark, leaving June on the steps with 2 cardboard boxes sitting in the slush like gravestones. Sophia stood hidden in the shadow of a large stone planter near the entrance. Her mind told her clearly to turn around. She knew what June was, a crime boss who operated in violence the way others operated in spreadsheets. The smart thing was to take the long way home and forget she had ever seen this. Then she watched his long fingers, bare where a heavy ring used to sit, brush slowly against the snow-covered ground. Something old and fierce inside her. Something her grandmother had planted too deep to pull out, refused to let her feet move in the safe direction. She stepped forward. Her boots crunched on frozen ground. His head snapped up, and for one unguarded instant she saw it. Raw feral panic in the eyes of the most feared man in the city. Then the mask returned. But she had already seen what lived beneath it. She walked until she stood a few feet from him, gripping her tote bag strap. "Mr. June," she said. He looked at her the way a predator regards something unexpected, wariness of an animal that has learned never to trust what it cannot immediately categorize. She was the maid, the woman who cleaned his lobby. "They took everything from you," she said. "You have nowhere to go tonight." He said nothing. A muscle moved along his jaw. The snow fell harder. She blinked it from her lashes. "I have a room," she said, the words arriving before she could stop them. "Small. Nothing like what you are used to. But it is warm and no one will look for you there." She held his gaze. "You can stay with me." The silence was enormous. He searched her face for the angle, the price, the hidden cost. In his world, kindness was always a transaction. He found nothing but a steady sincerity he had no framework for. He looked at the sealed doors, at the 2 boxes, at her. He gave one small, barely visible nod. She had just invited the storm inside. Her apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled of old cooking and damp plaster. He was too large for the room, not just physically, but in some other way she could not name. His gaze moved across her second-hand books stacked in a crate, the succulent on the windowsill, the photograph of her and her grandmother on the wall, 2 women laughing at something the camera could not capture. He revealed nothing. She gave him the sofa and the spare blanket. When she woke before dawn, he had not slept. He sat in the exact same position, shirt sleeves rolled to the forearm, revealing intricate black ink coiling around his right wrist. A dragon.
"There's coffee," she said.
She set a mug before him. Black. He looked at it, then at her. "Thank you, Sophia," he said. It was the first time he had used her name, read from her uniform tag at some point, and in his deep, quiet voice it landed differently than it ever had from anyone. Heavier. Deliberate. A word chosen carefully and meant to be kept. She noticed the current it sent through her chest and chose to ignore it. On the 3rd day, a black sedan with tinted windows parked across the street and did not move for hours. When she mentioned it, something cold and knowing crossed June's face. "My brother's people," he said, peering through the gap in the blinds. "They are not the patient kind." That night, she was woken by a strangled cry. He was thrashing on the sofa, muttering in Korean. One name cut through everything else like a blade. Eunhee. He jolted awake, scanning the dark room. When his eyes found her in the doorway, something cracked open in his expression. Not fear exactly, but the specific pain of being truly seen when you have spent your whole life ensuring no one ever looks closely enough. She brought him water. Their fingers touched as she handed it over. His skin was cold, but what moved through her arm was not. "Who is Eunhee?" she asked softly. His jaw tightened. He stared at the photograph on her wall. "My sister. When my brother moved against me, he took her, not openly, but as a guarantee. A reminder of what I stood to lose if I refused to step aside." He looked at her, and the self-recrimination in his eyes was so profound it made her chest ache. "I surrendered everything I had built to keep her safe. And they still hunt me. A displaced king is still a threat, even without a kingdom." She said nothing. She understood now what lived beneath the stone. Not cruelty. Not hunger for power. Guilt. The grief of a man who believed he had failed the one person who mattered. The next afternoon, the 2 men from the sedan got out and began moving door to door, showing a photograph. Sophia watched from the window, cold fear knotting in her stomach. "You have to leave," she told June. "They will find you here, and they will hurt you." "They will not stop," he said without heat. "Running only delays the inevitable." "Then I will lie," she said, the decision solid before she had finished saying it. "I will tell them I have not seen you." He looked at her for a long moment. Why? It was the genuine bewilderment of a man whose entire understanding of people was built on the premise that loyalty without payment does not exist. "You owe me absolutely nothing. Not a single thing." She could walk back into her small, safe, predictable life right now. She looked at him. The man who had surrendered his empire for his sister, who had sat in the snow rather than run. And she could not do it. "Because no one should face wolves at the door alone," she said. "That is the only reason I have." The knock came before she could say anything else. June moved instantly, not with the slowness of defeat, but with the precision of something that had only been resting. He caught her arm, guided her firmly to the bedroom doorway. "Not a sound," he said close to her ear, his breath warm against her temple. He pushed her inside, left the door to a hairline crack, and positioned himself flat against the wall beside the front door, lifting her heaviest hardcover textbook like a man who had improvised weapons before and found the experience unremarkable. She had not locked the front door. It swung open. A large man with a flattened face stepped inside, scanned the room, took 2 steps in. He never took a third. What followed lasted perhaps 15 seconds, a choreography of brutal precision she could only partially track through the crack in the door. The book came down, movement too fast to follow. A terrible sound, a man on the floor. The second man rushed in from the hallway, hand moving toward his jacket, and June was already there, 3 calculated strikes folding him to the ground. He disarmed him smoothly, checked the taken pistol, and stood over the 2 downed men. He turned and found her eyes through the crack in the door. He was Kwame June again, the king, the predator, standing in her living room with violence still clinging to him like electricity. "We have to go," he said, his voice entirely steady.
Now.
Her old life ended in that moment. She crossed into his world completely, and she did not look back. The motel they reached smelled of bleach and desperation. A neon sign painted everything in slow, flickering red. 1 thin blanket, peeling wallpaper. The adrenaline collapsed all at once, and she sank onto the edge of the mattress, arms wrapped around herself, staring at nothing. She had harbored a fugitive. She had run. Her quiet, ordered life was in ruins. June stood at the window, the gun now at his waistband. He turned and looked at her with an attention that was different from any he had given before, and then he crossed the room and knelt in front of her, so that his eyes were level with hers. The gesture was so unexpected it stole her breath. "You should have let them take me," he said, honest and flat. "Your life would not be this." "You think I could have," she said, sharper than she meant, "after what you told me about your sister?" He was quiet in the red light. "In my world," he said carefully, "kindness is always a transaction. I have been trying to locate what you want from me since the night you found me on those steps. I cannot find it." She held his gaze. "I stayed because I told myself it was the right thing," she said, her voice going quiet. "But that was only part of it. The truth is I could not stand the thought of you facing all of this without a single person in your corner." Something moved across his face, disbelief, and then something fragile and new that looked very much like hope. He leaned forward and rested his forehead gently against hers, eyes closing. She felt his breath, warm and steady, against her lips. Not a kiss, something more unguarded than a kiss. The gesture of a man who had forgotten how to trust, allowing himself, tentatively, to try. The world outside dissolved. There was only the red light, the 2 of them, and the fragile thing growing between a fallen king and the woman who refused to leave him to the dark. Morning shattered everything again. June turned on the small staticky television and Sophia's face filled the screen. Her employee photo, stark and unflattering. A person of interest in a violent incident, believed to be in the company of Kwame June, considered armed and dangerous. The blood left her face. His brother had made her the bait. "He knows I will not allow you to be harmed," June said, his voice dropping to its most dangerous register. "He intends to draw me out through you. Then running from you changes nothing," she said, the logic cold and clear. "My face is on the news. They will find me wherever I go. The only way this ends is if we end it." He stared at her, warring visibly with himself, the instinct to protect her against the tactical truth of her words. Their fates had been braided together by his brother's calculation. Unraveling it meant going to the source. The path forward came through a name, Choi Sung-won, an elderly man who had tended the building's rooftop garden for decades, his father's loyal man before him, dismissed when the brother took over, because men like Min Jae mistake loyalty for weakness. "I know him," Sophia said quietly. June's gaze snapped to hers. He used the service elevator with a special key. After your brother took over, I watched him leave the building carrying his things. He bowed to every staff member he passed on the way out. That is not a man who changed allegiances. The slow, dangerous smile that moved across June's face was the smile of a man who had just found a hidden army. They used their last cash for a single burner phone call. They met Choi in a shuttered restaurant. He was small, elderly, with eyes that held the clarity of someone who had witnessed decades of consequences. When he saw June, he stood and bowed deeply. "Young master," he said, raspy with age and what sounded like relief. I knew the story was not finished. Choi confirmed that Min-jae held power through manufactured fear, not loyalty. The older captains were uneasy. And there was a vulnerability, a secret ledger documenting Min-jae's dealings with a rival organization, the kind of betrayal the syndicate's elders would never forgive. The ledger was locked in the penthouse safe. "Getting to it is impossible," Choi said. "The building is fortified." Sophia reached into her wallet and set a plain plastic keycard on the table. The Master Building Services card she had never returned. "It will not get me past the lobby guards," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "But it will get me to the service corridors, and from there to the service elevator, and from there to the penthouse." Both men stared at her. The plan was madness, but it was all they had. Choi blinded the service corridor cameras for exactly 10 minutes. June dealt with the parking garage guards. Then it was Sophia alone. She walked the service corridors in her old uniform, keycard in hand, her pulse so loud she was certain it could be heard. At the service elevator, she swiped the card. The green light blinked. The doors opened. Inside the penthouse, the silence was wrong in the way empty rooms that once held great noise always are. She found the office, the painting, the safe. Her hands shook so badly, it took 3 attempts before the tumblers fell with a soft, definitive click. She pulled the heavy door open. The worn leather ledger was exactly where June said it would be. She closed her fingers around it. The private elevator chimed. Min-jae walked in, flanked by 2 guards. He looked at her at the open safe, ledger in hand, and smiled with the patience of a man who had been waiting comfortably. The whole thing had been guided, a trap. Then the window behind him exploded inward in a shower of glass. June swung through on a rope from the rooftop washing rig, descending like something from the city's darkest mythology, landing in a crouch with the gun level before he had fully absorbed the impact. What followed was chaos Sophia experienced from behind the heavy desk. Gunshots that rang like hammer blows. Movement too fast to track. June moving through it all with terrible efficiency until the guards were down and only brothers remained, circling each other in the wreckage. "You should have stayed gone," Min-jae said. "You should never have touched our sister." June replied, his voice carrying not rage, but the absolute calm of a conclusion already reached. His eyes moved to Sophia for one weighted fraction of a second, communicating everything without language. "And you should never have touched what is mine." The final shot was singular, decisive. In the quiet afterward, with Choi's people securing the building and sirens sounding from another world entirely, June walked to where Sophia crouched behind the desk. He knelt before her, took the ledger gently from her shaking hands, and set it aside, his priorities made clear by that single gesture. He cupped her face in both hands, hands that were trembling, just slightly, the only concession his body made to everything that had just happened. "It is finished," he said. She looked at him. King again. Empire, name, everything restored. And in the careful stillness of his face, she saw the question he did not know how to ask. Where did she belong in all of this now? He stood, took her hand, and led her to the shattered window. The entire city spread below them, glittering and vast. He stood close behind her, solid as a wall. "They believed you were my vulnerability," he said near her ear. "They built their entire strategy around using you to bring me out." A pause. His hand settled at her waist. Not a question. A statement, final and certain. "They were wrong about what that meant. You are not my weakness, Sophia. You are my territory. And everything I have, I protect." She did not flinch. She did not step away. She thought of her small apartment, her quiet life, the careful borders she had drawn around herself over years of practiced invisibility. That life was already gone. She had crossed into his world with one act of compassion on a snowy night, and there was no crossing back. As she leaned, slowly, deliberately, into the warmth of the man standing behind her, she understood she was not mourning the life she had lost. She was choosing this one. That is where their story begins. Not ends, begins. A woman who cleaned floors for a man who could have bought the entire building, who found, in his most broken moment, that she was the only person left in his world willing to simply be human with him. And a man who had spent a full decade believing kindness was always a lie, confronted at his lowest point with proof that he was wrong. Here's the question I want you to answer honestly in the comments. Was Sophia brave, or was she reckless? And when someone has absolutely nothing left, is there a meaningful difference? Drop your answer below. If this story moved you at all, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that compassion, even when it costs everything, is never the wrong instinct. Subscribe if you are not already here, because what we have coming for you next you will not want to miss.